Welcome to the United States of Terror, the series where we journey state by state into the darkest corners of American history. Across this country, every town, every city, and every neighborhood has its secrets. And some of those secrets are far more horrifying than anything fiction could even create. Tonight, we're traveling to 4 different states: Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, and Idaho, each with crimes that shook communities to their very core. These cases aren't just about murder, they're about the human capacity for evil, the fragility of safety, and the ways ordinary life could be shattered in an instant. Before we begin, a very quick warning. This episode includes detailed discussions of murder, child abuse, and prolonged violence, along with other disturbing events. Viewer discretion is very strongly advised.
If not mandatory in some cases.
If not mandatory, and per usual, I have my lovely, lovely husband, Chaotic, here.
Indeed. Well, I ought to.
Florida has carried a reputation of extreme and unusual crimes already as is. But some of these cases stand apart not because they're strange, but because of how deeply personal they are and can get. The Deltona Massacre was one of these cases. It wasn't random, it wasn't a robbery gone wrong, it was prolonged, intentional acts of violence carried out inside a home against people who knew their attackers. Now, to understand what truly happened on that very night, it's important to look at the people that was involved in this case and the environment they had lived in, along with the tensions that have been building along before that night. Deltona, Florida is a suburban city in Volusia County. It's not very far from Orlando, actually.
Well, that doesn't sound too far away.
Yeah. It's largely residential with quiet streets, single family homes, and working class families. The kind of place where neighbors might know each other, but nothing about it suggests the kind of violence that would soon define the national headlines. At the center of this case was Kevin Edward Smith. At 18 years old, Kevin was legally an adult, but by most accounts, he was still deeply tied to his home life. He lived with his mother, Mary Smith, and other family members. This household wasn't unusual in structure, extended family living together, sharing spaces, responsibilities, and daily life. But beneath the surface, there was a lot of problems. Reports following the case described the tension within the home. Arguments, disagreements, and a strained relationship between Kevin and his mother that had been building over time. While not uncommon in many households, in this case, those tensions would later be viewed as a part of a much larger and most dangerous progression. Kevin didn't act alone. He was closely associated with Michael Salas, which was a 19-year-old friend at the time. The two spent significant amount of time together, and according to investigators, their relationship played a major role in what ultimately happened.
Oh.
Michael Salas was described as someone who, like Smith, blended in. There was nothing outwardly extreme about him that would immediately signal what he would be capable of. But as the case unfolded, it became clear that the young men shared something that escalated beyond normal behavior, something that moved from frustration and violence. Investigators would later determine that the attack wasn't entirely spontaneous. There were indications of planning, or at the very least, a willingness to carry out the sustained violence once it began. The house on Courtyard Boulevard became the fair point of everything. Inside were multiple family members, including adults and children. It was a very well lived in home filled with everyday objects, routines, and the kind of normalcy that makes what happened there seems even harder to comprehend. On August 6th of 2004, the normalcy ended. At some point during the day or evening, the situation inside the home shifted from ordinary to very violent. Investigators believe that Smith and Salas initiated an attack on the people living there, and then quickly gained control of the situation. Once the first crucial elements of the crime was resistance. The victims were bound, limiting their ability to escape or fight back. This detail is very important because it shows that the attackers were not attacking for a brief moment of chaos, they were establishing control. And once the control was established, the violence then escalated. According to evidence later presented, that the victims were held for extended periods of time. This wasn't a single act; it was a sequence of events that unfolded over hours. During that time, the victims were physically assaulted. The nature of the injuries indicated repeated attacks rather than isolated incidences. Investigators also determined that there was multiple weapons used. Some of these were not brought into the home, but instead taken from within it. This suggests that the attackers adapted as the situation continued, using whatever was available to maintain dominance over the victims. The presence of children among the victims adds another layer onto this case. These were individuals who had no ability to defend themselves, caught in an environment as the adults were subjected to the same lack of escape. I know I'm kind of like going fast in this, so for just catching everyone up. Uh, they knew the family. They tied the family up in within the house, and they were using like things around the house to torture them.
They were his family.
Yeah, they were his family. Well, no, they were friends of the family. So one was in the family, and one was a friend of the family.
Yeah, I know one was a friend of the family, but one of them was like a son.
Yeah.
And dude with the friend Michael is like
He's a friend of the family.
Forgive me for my lack of a better way of like equating this. He's essentially Erebus to horse because like quite literally from what the way you described it, none of this would have happened if Michael would have just kept his mouth shut and would have stayed away from him.
I mean, let's read more into it, shall we? Let's read a little bit more into it. As hours passed, the situation became increasingly severe. The attackers maintained control over the home, preventing anyone from leaving or seeking help. There were no immediate calls to law enforcement during the ordeal, which further supports the conclusion that the victims were completely overpowered. Eventually, the violence resulted in the deaths of 6 individuals. By the time the authorities became involved, the events inside the house had already concluded. What remained was the aftermath, evidence that would need to be carefully examined to reconstruct what happened. When deputies entered the home, they encountered a scene that would later be described as one of the most disturbing in the area's history. The condition of the victims, the signs of prolonged restraint, and the extent of the injuries all pointed to the crime that unfolded over time and not in a single moment. From the beginning, the investigators understood that this case would require detailed reconstruction of all events. Who was involved? What happened first? How control was established? And how the situation escalated to the point where 6 people had ended up dying. Very early in the investigation, suspicion turned toward the individual who had directed access to the home. There were no signals of forced entry and no indications of an outside intruder. Everything pointed inwards. By the time investigators began reconstructing the events inside the home on Courtyard Boulevard, one thing was immediately clear. This wasn't a mass crime. We already said it took over a course of hours. What happened inside the home had a beginning, middle, and end, and each phase revealed something different about the level of control, intent, and escalation involved. Based on forensic evidence, witness timelines, and statements gathered during the investigation, attorneys were able to piece together a general sequence of events. The exact moment the violence began is not known down to the minute, but investigators believe the attack started sometime during daytime on August 6th of 2004. At the time, multiple members of the household were present inside the home. The environment would have been routine, people moving through shared spaces, unaware that the situation was about to change drastically. The initial confrontation likely began between Kevin Edward Smith and at least one of the victims. Given the existing tension in the home, investigators believe that the conflict may have escalated into physical violence. Gee, no shit, Sherlock. Like, But what makes this case different is what happens next. Instead of stopping, the violence expanded. With the environment of with the involvement of Michael Salas, the situation shifted from a single confrontation into a controlled environment where the attackers began to dominate the entire household. One by one, the victims were subdued. Evidence showed the restraints being used, indicating that the attackers initially prevented the victims from escaping or resisting. This step is crucial in understanding the nature of the crime. It required time, coordination, and decision making. It was very controlled rather than chaotic. And not you, different chaos. Once the victims were restrained, the attackers had full control over the environment. At this point, the crime entered its longest and most disturbing phase. Over the course of several hours, the victims were subjected to repeated acts of violence. Medical examinations later revealed that the injuries were not consistent with a single attack, rather than showed patterns of repeated trauma, indicating that the violence occurred in several stages. This suggests that there was moments of pauses, moments where the attacker stopped, then resumed, moments where decisions were made to continue. During this time, multiple weapons were used, like we already kind of got to. Some were likely brought into the situation, but others were taken directly from the home. Household items were repurposed, which further supports the conclusion that the attackers adapted to the situation.
Or just simply knew that shit or that it was
Like they, yeah, like they knew the house pretty much. The use of multiple weapons also indicates escalation. When one method ended, another began. The victims remained alive for a significant portion of this period. The conclusion comes from both forensic evidence and the condition in which they were found. This means that they were awake, they were aware of what's happening, aware of who was responsible, and aware that they were unable to escape. At some point during this extended period, the violence became fatal. Each victim was ultimately killed inside the home. The exact order of deaths is difficult to establish with certainty, but investigators believe that the killings occurred over time rather than all at once. It's important because it reinforces the idea that the attackers maintained control from beginning to end, and there was no interruption, no outside interference, and not even an attempt to seek help in some cases. The house remained isolated from the outside world while everything unfolded inside. Another key detail is the lack of any successful escape. Despite multiple victims being present, none were able to leave the home or alert neighbors. This further demonstrates how complete the control actually was. And that's what they're even trying to figure out to this day still, is how they were able to restrain like a whole house when it was just the two of them.
quite literally.
When it was like more than 6 people there, technically. Well, no, it was 6 people there. I think it was only 6 people there, actually. Never mind. What am I talking about? Dude. Uh, the attackers had effectively turned the house into a contained environment where they dictated everything that happened. Then, as the hours passed, the situation reached its conclusion. By this time, the violence ended, and of course, 6 people had passed. What remained was a scene that reflected not just the outcome, but the process, the secrets of actions that's taken over place. Now, after the killings, the suspects didn't immediately turn themselves in, instead, they left the scene. This decision would later on play a role in the investigation, as it showed a clear separation between the act itself and the aftermath. The crime had ended, but the situation was not yet resolved. Eventually, law enforcement became aware that something was very wrong. The exact trigger for the welfare check or discovery involvement concern from outside the home led deputies to respond to the residents. When they entered, they encountered the full scope of what actually happened. The victims were located throughout the house. The condition of the scene immediately indicated prolonged violence, obviously, like we already said. It spread across the space. Investigators secured the scene and began the process of documentation. Every detail mattered at this point. Placement of objects, signs of restraint, patterns of injury, and any evidence that could establish a timeline. From the beginning, the nature of this crime pointed inward towards individuals who had the time and access. Since there was no forced entry, everything suggested that the perpetrators had been inside the home for an extended period, moving freely and controlling the environment way before the encounter even happened. So again, kind of like hinting at like the attackers lived in the house, or they were there often enough to know where everything was and how everything worked.
Yeah.
As investigators worked through the evidence, the focus quickly narrowed. This wasn't a mystery of who done it. It's a matter of confirming what the evidence was already pointing towards. As the evidence was processed, it began to form a even more clear picture of what happened inside the house. A picture that had led directly to the two individuals, Kevin Edward Smith and Michael Salas. Once the scene on the courtroom boulevard was secure, the case shifted from reconstruction to the identification and proof. The investigators were no longer just asking what happened. They were now focused on confirming who was actually responsible and building the case to hold up in court. From the beginning, several factors immediately narrowed the scope of the investigation. Obviously, we already said that there was no forced entry, there was no sign of an outside intruder, and it definitely wasn't random. Everything pointed to someone who had direct access the entire time. That detail alone significantly reduced the number of possible suspects. We already know who the suspect was. The focus quickly shifted towards the two suspects we already been on, but the main attention was centered on Kevin Edward Smith. As a home resident, Smith had unrestricted access. He knew the layout, the occupants, the routines. He didn't need to force his way in since he was already inside. But the investigators weren't just looking at him. Very early on in the process, evidence suggested that there was more than one individual involved. And this is where Michael Salas comes into focus. Witness accounts, known accusations, and early leads place Salas in a close connection with Smith. As investigators began mapping the relationships and recent activity, it became increasingly clear that the two had been together around the same time of the murders. From there, the investigations moved quickly. Law enforcement began gathering physical evidence from the actual scene, including biological evidence, fingerprints, and the condition and placement of the items throughout the home. Each piece of evidence contributed into reconstructing not what just happened, but who had been present. Forensic analysis played another major role. Evidence collected from inside the house linked both Smith and Salas directly to the crime scene in ways that could not be explained by normal daily activity alone. The nature and distribution of the evidence suggested that active involvement during the time of the murders took place. In addition to physical evidence, investigators took the behavior immediately following the crime. Neither suspect remained at the crime scene, and neither of them contacted the authorities. Instead, both have left the residence after the killings. This behavior was significant. It indicates awareness and understanding that what had occurred was not only violent, but criminal. As law enforcement tracked their movements, both suspects were located and taken into custody within a relatively short period of time. So, like, within like a week, they got him. Actually, no, it was actually within a few days, I'm pretty sure.
Seems like it.
Yeah. Once detained, the case entered another crucial phase, the interrogation. During questioning, investigators worked to establish timelines, identify inconsistencies, and compare statements against the physical evidence that was already collected. Interrogations in cases like this are methodical. Detectives don't rely on a single admission. They build pressure through detail. They present the facts, challenge the contradictions, and gradually narrow the space for denial. While the exact content of every statement was not made fully public. Authorities confirmed that information obtained during the questioning aligned with the forensic findings. This alignment was crucial in criminal cases. Physical evidence establishes presence and action. Statements helped establish intent, sequence, and participation. Together, they formed the foundation of the prosecution's case. Another important aspect of the investigation was the condition of the victims. Medical examiners conducted detailed autopsies, documenting injuries, causes of death, and any indicators of timing. These reports confirmed what investigators had already suspected, that the victims obviously didn't die instantly. The injuries reflected prolonged violence, multiple forms of trauma, repeated assaults in many different variants, and evidence consistent with restraint and lack of escape. These findings reinforced the timeline investigators had already been building: a controlled environment sustained over hours with escalating violence leading to multiple deaths. The number of victims also played a role in the case and how the case was approached. 6 homicide victims meant 6 separate counts, each requiring its own evidentiary support. Prosecutors would also need to show not just that the suspects were present, but that they were responsible for each individual death. This requires a very detailed breakdown of the scene. Who was found where? What injuries were sustained, and how each death occurred within the border sequence of events. Sorry. English is hard. I'm gonna put it there for you.
Yeah.
Investigators also examined the use of weapons. Because multiple weapons were involved, indicating items from within the home, this added another layer onto the case. It demonstrated adaptability and continuation. The attackers didn't stop with one method. They continued to use whatever was available. This detail would later become important in court, as it supported arguments of intent and persistence. By the time the investigation phase was complete, authorities had built a comprehensive case. They had physical evidence placing both victims at the scene during the crime, forensic findings confirming prolonged and repeated violence, behavioral evidence showing the flight after the murders, and the statement that aligned exactly with the established timeline. At that point, the focus had shifted from the investigation to the prosecution. The question was no longer who was responsible, it was how to present the case in a way that fully accounted for the scale, the timeline, and the severity of what happened in that house. Both Kevin Edward Smith and Michael Salas were formally charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder. And with those charges, the case moved into the courtroom, where every detail would be examined again, but this time in front of a jury.
Mm-hmm.
Dun, dun, dun. This one's really long. This one's going to be really long.
Yeah, should be interesting.
By the time the case of the Deltona Massacre reached the courtroom, the foundation had already been built through months of investigation. Now the focus shifted into presentation. With each piece of evidence, each forensic detail, each statement gathered by investigators, it would now be examined under the legal scrutiny. The goal was to no longer just want to understand what happened, but now to prove that it happened beyond any reasonable doubt. Both Kevin Edward Smith and Michael Salas faced multiple counts of first-degree murder with 6 victims, and the scale of the case was immediately clear to the court. The prosecution's approach was methodical. They laid out the timeline step by step, walking the jury through the events that happened inside the home. And this included the initial confrontation, the restraint of the victims, and the prolonged violence, and also the eventual deaths. Central to the argument was intent. First-degree murder requires proof that the act was deliberate, not accidental or even impulsive. To establish that, prosecutors pointed to several key elements: the use of the restraints, the timeline, the repeated violence, and mainly the weapons, actually, that was used. Taken together, these factors painted a picture of control and continuation. This was not a single moment that got out of hand, but it was a sustained series of actions. The prosecution also relied heavily on the forensic evidence. We already know about the forensic evidence. Medical examiners reports were presented to show the extent of the victim's injuries and to reinforce the conclusion that the violence happened over time. The nature of the injuries supported the argument that the victims were alive during much of the ordeal, and that this detail is very much crucial.
Yeah. Incredibly crucial.
It demonstrated not only the intent, but the persistence, and the decision to continue the violence rather than to stop. In addition to the forensic evidence, the prosecution introduced physical evidence collected from the scene. This included items that were used in the attacks, as well as biological evidence linking both defendants directly to the crime. They also addressed behavior after the crime. Both defendants had left the scene rather than looking for help or reporting what happened. This was presented as evidence of consciousness of guilt, an awareness of the serious crime that had been committed. But on the other side, the defense faced a difficult position. In cases involving this level of physical and forensic evidence, the strategy often shifts its way from denying involvement entirely and instead focuses on reducing the degree of responsibility.
Seems like it.
This can include arguments related to the intent, influence, or role each defendant played relative to the other. Relative, sorry. Yeah. Relative?
I said, what?
Huh? While specific defense strategies varied, the central challenge remained the same: overcoming the volume and consistency of the evidence presented by the prosecution. The trial progressed. The jury was exposed to the full scope of the case. They heard the timeline, they saw the evidence, and they presented the reality of what had taken place. Cases like this aren't just legally complex, they're also emotionally very heavy. Obviously, 6 victims, meaning like it's like grief times 6 for most of the family. Yeah. Of the proceedings. While the case went to deliberation, the jury was tasked with evaluating not just whether the defendants were involved, but whether the prosecution had proved premeditation or intent for each murder. Ultimately, both Kevin Edward Smith and Michael Salas were found guilty. The verdict reflected the strengths of the evidence and the consistency of the prosecution's case. Following the guilty verdicts, the court moved to the sentencing phase. Given the severity of the crimes, the sentences were both significant. Both defendants received multiple life sentences, ensuring that they would spend the rest of their lives in prison. The sentencing marked the legal conclusion of the case, but not the end of its impact. For the families of the victims, the outcome brought a form of closure, but not resolution. Cases involving this level of violence leaves lasting effects that extend far beyond the courtroom. For the community of Deltona, the massacre didn't just change the perception of what could happen in a place that felt ordinary. It wasn't just the scale of a crime, it was where it happened. Inside a home, among a family, without warning. The case became one of the most well-known mass killings in Florida's history, not because of the number of victims, but because of the nature of the violence and the relationship between those involved. It's often referenced in discussions of domestic and familial mass violence, where the threat doesn't come from the outside, but within. And that's what continues to make the Deltona Massacre stand out. It wasn't random, it wasn't distant, but it was very personal. A crime that unfolded over hours inside of a place that was meant to be safe, carried out by individuals who were already trusted enough to be there. And even years later, it remains a case that's studied, remembered, and difficult to fully process. Not just because of what happened, but because of how it happened.
Yeah, pretty much. Especially in that case, because that fucking literally tortured them for like hours on end before winding up killing them.
Yeah. Also, I know there was like a lot of repeating parts in that. Um, that's kind of because I was trying to dance around certain details.
Makes sense.
Because I'm pretty sure there was also sexual assault involved in that.
Incest.
I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. I have to go back because I did start studying about this case like, what, 2 months ago? This script has been just sitting in my like folder for a good while. Before we move into Georgia, since we do have our things packed and ready now, we lied. We are going to garden. Ooh,
I heard that cracker.
I cracked my shoulder. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I had to stretch.
Also, would you like some coffee? I was going to say for your coffee.
Oh yeah, my coffee. Have it, please. Oh, hazelnut. Hell yeah. Thank you. I love hazelnut. So good.
Yeah.
I like it. I put brown sugar in that too. I'm not a fan.
Fair enough, fair enough.
That's more of a you thing. I'm not too big on the brown sugar.
Can't argue that. Yeah.
Is it bad to say I like light candy better? Like I'm not a big chocolate person, but I like the sour candies, like the gummies and stuff like that. So it's like it reminds me of like light and dark alcohol. Like
I think you just really like chemicals. Because all I think of when I try fucking sour candy.
I just like sour.
Yeah.
I mean I can drink straight lemon juice. Really think.
I still don't know how the fuck you did that. Anyway.
Cheers. If you got it, smoke it. Feel free.
Cheers.
Cheers. Oh Jesus. So the next one, I promise, is not as long. And I'm like about 50% sure it doesn't have as many repeats as the first one.
50% sure?
Again, like 2 months ago.
Then you just revisit this script?
I revisited it. I didn't rewrite the whole thing.
There.
I only like redid like maybe the last two states.
Yeah, good. Yeah. What's the next date?
So we're in Georgia.
We're in Georgia.
And this one's relatively like more recent actually.
Oh no.
2013.
Cool.
So this is the Amani Moss case.
Amani Moss.
Yep. In 2013, a case out of Georgia drew national attention, not because of how unpredictable it was, but because of how prolonged and preventable it appeared to be. The tragic death of Amani Ross, a 10-year-old girl in Lawrenceville, I hope I pronounced that right, would later be classified not only as an isolated act of violence, but as a result of ongoing abuse within her own home. Unlike cases that unfolded in a single moment, this one developed over time. Now, before we get further into the case, this is the case of child abuse and child endangerment. So if that makes you uncomfy, see ya. That makes you uncomfy. See ya.
Viewer discretion is very advised.
Yeah, viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Yeah, why the fuck is that like fucking Carmen there? Very big.
Very advised. Sorry. I get uncomfortable with child abuse as well sometimes.
I get you.
But we all have to talk about what makes us uncomfy sometimes.
Indeed.
Indeed. Now, understanding what happened requires looking at the environment Imani was living in and the people responsible for her care. Also, the warning signs that were presented before her death. Imani Moss lived with her father, Eamon Ross, or Iman Ross. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And her stepmother, Tiffany Moss. Together, they lived with multiple children in the household. On the surface, the family appeared structured. 2 adults raising children in a suburban home. Sounds like the American dream, right? But as detailed later emerged, it became clear that the living conditions inside the house was far from stable or safe. Reports following the investigation revealed that Imani was subjected to ongoing punishments that went beyond just regular discipline. This included extreme food deprivation. Over time, Imani became severely malnourished. Her physical condition deteriorated to the point to where it was visibly apparent that something was wrong. Despite
We're talking like 50 pounds soaking wet.
Yeah, like you could see her bones through her skin in some places. Like I feel like they kept her because there are images of her you could publicly find if you really wanted to find it. But also keep in mind some of these pictures were also taken in some of her best moments, so while obviously it was not her all the time.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure they kept her just like big enough to not raise like school concern or anything. But like if a doctor and all looked at her or like any normal person like off the street would be like, "Oh, you're extremely skinny." Like something ain't right. Yeah, like something ain't right. But I guess the school never questioned. I don't know. I don't know. Sorry. Personal beef with public school system.
Yeah.
Despite this, the situation had tragically continued. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case is the duration. This was not a sudden escalation, but it was a pattern. According to investigators, Imani was regularly denied food as a form of punishment. In some instances, she was isolated from the rest of the family, furthering reinforcing the control being exerted over time. The restriction of food wasn't occasional, but it was sustained. As the time went on, the effects became more severe. Malnutrition impacts every part of the body. It weakens the immune system, reduces energy levels, and in extreme cases leads to organ failure. By the time of her death, Imani Moss has weighed significantly less than what would be expected of a child at her age. Despite the severity of her condition, there was no successful intervention before it was too late. No removal from the home, and no effective interruption of the pattern of abuse. The absence of intervention became the major point of the discussion after the case came to light. On October 24th of 2013, Imani Moss had sadly passed away in her home. Her death wasn't immediately reported in a typical way. Instead, I'm sorry. I let me reread that one. Her death was not immediately reported in a typical way. Instead of her father and stepmother took actions that would later become the central to the criminal case against them. After Imani's death, her body was placed in a trash can. Its decision marked a shift from ongoing abuse to the attempt to conceal what had happened. The remains were later burnt, an act of the significant complicity of the. The remains were later burnt, an act that significantly complicated the investigation and demonstrated awareness of wrongdoing. At this point, the case moved beyond neglect and abuse into deliberate concealment of death. When authorities became aware of the situation, the investigation began to unfold rapidly. But by then, the crucial question was no longer whether Amani could be saved. It was how something like this had been allowed to happen for so long without being stopped or noticed.
Yeah.
I'm gonna garden again real quick. I gotta take a moment from that.
I don't blame you.
Cause yeah, this case is genuinely like, oh, okay. I don't like reading the ones with like kids involved. I don't know why I chose this one.
I don't know either. Yeah, it's fine.
Whoopsies.
It is certainly quite fun.
Making myself get emotional. I'm not laughing because I find it funny. I just like nervous, like laughing.
Okay.
I know. I don't want someone to listen to me laughing and giggling, just like you find it funny a child died. I'm like, no, it's completely opposite, actually. Cheers.
Indeed. Cheers.
We only did like a little like snapper piece, so I didn't like. We don't need too much of a coughing ASMR.
Indeed.
The irony, we're talking about abuse and death, and there's an ambulance outside.
Yep.
Jeez. Oh no. That's. Oh no. Okay, sorry. Amani Moss's death in 2013 was not a result of a single moment of violence, but rather a culmination of months of ongoing abuse and neglect. According to investigators, Amani had been subjected to extreme food deprivation for months. On multiple occasions, she was deliberately denied meals as a form of punishment. This was not occasional or accidental, it was systematic. The physical effects were severe. Medical examiners reported that at the time of her death, Amani only weighed 32 pounds. And keep in mind, she was 10. She was 20.
She was still alive?
She was 10 years old and didn't even weigh 50 pounds.
Holy fuck, dude.
Like I said, the images that they show online of her are like of her before she got that bad. Like that, like it's her best moments of when she was at least like semi healthy.
I actually believe in that.
So yeah, that's why I said my little theory piece on the whole. They might have kept her big. I don't know. That's my fault. Apologies. My theory has been proven false.
Baby, that's spelling right.
There's nothing in there.
There's liquid in it.
That's fine. Yeah, never mind. Oopsies.
Love you.
Love you too. Amani weighed only 32 pounds, significantly below the healthy weight for a 10-year-old child. Her body showed clear signs of malnourishment, including muscle wasting, brittle bones, and weakened organs. Also, muscle wasting is an actual medical term I found out.
It sounds about right. Your muscles can definitely degrade over time.
Yeah, but I didn't know wasting was the term that they use medically. Yeah. The abuse extended beyond starvation. Investigators noted that she was frequently isolated from other family members. This isolation often occurred during punishment, leaving her alone for long periods of time with no support or oversight. Neighbors and family members later reported noticing her declining health. Okay, so people did notice. But these concerns did not result in any investigation prior to her death, or intervention prior to her death. Social services have been contacted in some cases, but the warnings were either unheeded or insignificant to prevent tragedy.
Sounds about right for CPS.
Yep, sounds about right in some cases. On October 24th of 2013, the culmination of abuse had occurred. Amani's father, Iman Ross, and her stepmother, Tiffany Moss, were present in the home. Her exact final hours were reconstructed through interviews and forensic evidence, which indicated she was alive shortly before being placed in the trash can.
Ah.
So pretty much like she was dying and like while they were holding it her to dump her in the can pretty much. Like she was alive.
She was actively alive and oh, they should be buried in prison.
Following her death, the parents attempted to conceal the crime. Amani's body was burnt and placed into a trash can. The disposal was deliberate, and investigators later identified that it was an effort to hide evidence of her death. The combination of prolonged starvation, abuse, and concealment escalated to the severity of the charges. What began as neglect had become a criminal act resulting in homicide. The case drew attention to the warnings that had been present for months. Teachers, neighbors, and some relatives have noted that Amani was visibly underweight and appeared malnourished. These reports, while concerning, did not prevent the continuation of abuse. Investigators later described the pattern of treatment as a cruel and consistent, a deliberate and repeated effort to control and punish the child through deprivation. By reconstructing the timeline, authorities were able to establish both the extent of the abuse and the responsibility of the adults in the household. This timeline became a key component to the prosecutor's case, demonstrating that Amani Moss's death was not accidental, but the predictable result of ongoing intentional neglect. So basically, they knew that she was already on the verge of dying.
And then they just threw her in the fucking trash.
Yeah, basically all that.
I can't even say just threw her in the trash. They
did. They threw her in the trash. Well, they burnt her. But they were in the trash.
If you would let me finish! Now I see how you feel. Okay, now I'm shutting my mouth on it.
I had to get my payback. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, you chill.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm chill.
Okay. The investigation into Amani Moss's death began after authorities were alerted to the unusual circumstances surrounding her disappearance in the state of the home. When law enforcement arrived at the Moss residence in Lawrenceville, Georgia, they were immediately faced with a home that showed signs of severe neglect. Investigators noted that Amani was missing, and the condition of the household indicated a pattern of ongoing abuse. The initial tip to the authorities came from a combination of concerned relatives and neighbors, and some had noticed her extreme thinness, while others reported seeing her isolated or being denied food. While social services had recently prior reports, these warnings were not led to a significant intervention, highlighting systematic gaps in welfare monitoring. Cough, cough, sneeze, hackle. Once on the scene, sorry. Sorry. Personal beef. Fucking. Never mind.
I feel it.
Once on the scene, law enforcement quickly began interviewing family members. Iman Ross and Tiffany Moss, not Ross. Iman Moss.
You've been saying Ross for like the last like fucking 10 minutes, and I don't know if for a while there I couldn't tell if they both just had separate fucking like Osses in their names.
No, they're both Moss.
Okay, thank you.
Iman Moss and Tiffany Moss were present and became the primary suspects in the investigation. There we go. Jesus. During questioning, inconsistencies in their statements immediately raised suspicion. Investigators noted discrepancies between their accounts and the physical evidence, including the location of Amani's body and the condition of the home. Forensic evidence in this case was extremely crucial. Autopsy reports confirmed that Amani had suffered the prolonged starvation. Her body showed signs of chronic malnutrition, including extreme low body weight, weakened organs, and the evidence of repeated deprivation over time. The medical examiner concluded that her death was directly caused by prolonged deprivation, making the death both preventable and intentional. Investigators also documented the concealment of the body. Evidence indicated that both parents had burnt Amani's remains and attempted to dispose of her in a trash can. The the effort to hide the crime demonstrated awareness of wrongdoing and deliberate attempts to obstruct investigation. Physical evidence collected from the home contributed reports of abuse. Investigators observed evidence of malnutrition, neglect, and the environment in which Amani had been forced to live. Items such as limited or inaccessible food, signs of prolonged isolation, and the overall condition of the household supported the timeline of abuse. Once evidence was gathered, authorities arrested both Iman Moss and Tiffany Moss. They faced charges including murder, aggravated child abuse, and concealing the death of a child. These charges reflected both the sustained neglect leading to Amani's death and the deliberate actions to hide her death afterwards.
There should be a clause saying that when they die, they get buried in the basement of the prison.
Like they're not allowed to have a tombstone or
Yes.
yeah. Honestly, in some cases, depending on the person and the crime, yeah. Honestly, I could see that. Statements, forensic findings, and evidence from the home all linked the parents directly to the abuse and death. Prosecutors emphasized that Amani's condition was not the result of a single act, but prolonged intentional patterns. At this stage, the investigation established three crucial points: that the child suffered repeated and deliberate food deprivation, that both adults in the household were directly responsible, and the concealment of the body demonstrated awareness and intent after the fact. The evidence laid out the foundation in the prosecution's case made it clear that the deaths and abuse were neither accidental nor circumstantial. I'm surprised I was able to read that. Yay! Following their arrests, Iman Moss and Tiffany Moss faced the legal system for one of the most tragic child abuse cases in recent Georgia history. The trial focused on several key points: the prolonged nature of the abuse, the parents' deliberate actions, the concealment of Amani's death. Prosecutors presented detailed evidence showing the timeline of the starvation, isolation, and neglect that ultimately led to her death. Medical examiners testified about the severity of Amani's malnutrition, explaining that her body weight and organ condition made her death both preventable and directly caused by sustained deprivation.
There you go. Give yourself a minute to read it, Perry.
Forensic evidence from the home reinforced these findings, including documentation of limited food access, signs of isolation, and the steps taken by the parents to hide her remains. Statements from relatives, neighbors, and social service reports provided additional context, demonstrating the warnings that had been present for months while being ignored and inadequately addressed. During the trial, the prosecution argued that the abuse was intentional and systematic. They emphasized that both Iman and Tiffany Moss had responsibility and the opportunity to care for Amani. Yet instead of choosing to impose a pattern of punishment chose to impose a pattern of punishment through starvation and neglect. The concealment of her body after the death further highlighted the awareness of wrongdoing, as we already stated. The defense attempted to mitigate responsibility by suggesting that the abuse was not intended to be fatal, and that circumstances escalated beyond the parents' control. However, The combination of the medical evidence, witness testimony, and documented patterns of the abuse made it difficult to dispute that the intentional nature of the neglect. After careful deliberation, the jury returned verdicts convicting both parents. Iman Moss was found guilty of malice murder and aggravated child cruelty, among other charges, while Tiffany Moss was found guilty of felony murder, aggravated child cruelty, and concealing of death. Sentencing reflected the severity of the crimes. Both received lengthy prison terms without the possibility of early release for any murder charge, ensuring that they would be held accountable for the death of their child. The case had a wide-reaching effects beyond the courtroom, though. It had sparked renewed scrutiny for Georgia's child welfare system and the effectiveness of social services in preventing abuse. Questions were raised about how warning signs could be missed and protocols might have to be improved to protect other children in similar situations. Amani Moss's death remains a stark reminder that the consequence and the responsibility of adults have to protect their children in their care. For the community, the case left a lasting mark. It highlighted both the vulnerability of children in private homes and the need for vigilance when warning signs appear. When justice was achieved in court, while justice was achieved in court, the tragedy of Amani's life and death continues to resonate, reinforcing the importance of awareness, intervention, and the protection of the most vulnerable members of our society.
Yeah, that's true. Like, good lord.
Yeah.
Like that level of neglect is like just.
Also, little side note. Little side note too. This just goes to show that everything that we do as adults affects the kids too.
In every way, shape, or form.
In every single topic. Anyways,
Yeah.
just back to what we.
I had to think about that for a moment. Yeah, on the next one.
Yeah, now we're going to the lovely, lovely place, paradise, as most people call it, of Hawaii.
People call Hawaii paradise?
Because it's like an island, like.
Yeah, fair enough. Island paradise.
Yeah, like island paradise situation. Yeah.
I always gotta put situation in the back like it's a bad thing. Like, what the fuck?
It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, well,
It's a stereotype, though, so it's like a situation.
Yeah, I know, but when you say situation, it makes it sound like all of a sudden someone fucking died there. Or like,
I mean,
someone got into a fight there.
Speaking of someone dying there, this is the murder of Dana Ireland.
I was hoping you'd catch on to that.
Yeah. Hawaii is often thought of as paradise. Beaches, palm trees, and a slower pace of life painted a picture of tranquility. But beneath the surface, like anywhere else, real-life horrors can and do occur. The murder of Dana Ireland is a stark reminder that even the most idyllic settings, violence can reach deeply into our personal lives. The crime happened on Honolulu in 1991, but the story begins long before that day. Dana Ireland was a 21-year-old University of Hawaii student, known by friends as bright, ambitious, and independent. She had dreams of finishing college and craving out her own path in life, like carving out her own path in life. Dana had a boyfriend, John or Jack Ireland, who was not only a significant part of her social life, but also central to the tragic events that would unfold. Also, I just realized, even though they're in a relationship with each other, they have the same last name, even though they were not married. That's like her boyfriend.
I was a little confused there for that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, to clarify that, like it does say boyfriend throughout like any and all articles I found on this. Um, but they have the same last name, so I don't know if they got married at some point and then got divorced or something, or I don't know what's up with that. By all accounts, the relationship had been seen normal ups and downs of young adulthood, but underneath the surface, there were warning signs of tension. Jack Ireland, who was in his mid 20s at the time, had a reputation of being controlling. His friends would later describe episodes of jealousy and arguments that sometimes escalated into threats. While these interactions might have seemed minor at the time, in hindsight they were a part of a pattern that hinted at the danger. Dana lived a relatively normal life in Honolulu apartments, attending classes, socializing with friends, and enjoying the kind of independence that comes with young adulthood. But that normalcy would be shattered on the night of October 16th, 1991. That evening, Dana left for what she thought would be a routine outing. She was last seen alive after meeting Jack Ireland through the exact sequence of movements that night would later require detailed reconstruction by investigators. The events of the night were not random. They were not the result of strangers or a burglary gone wrong. Instead, they were the accumulation of personal conflict, jealousy, and premeditation. Investigators would later determine that the crime was deliberate, carried out in the way that demonstrated control, calculation, and intent. It was very personal, and that made it even more chilling. Dana Ireland's last hours were marked by deception and manipulation. According to reports and evidence, she was lured into a remote location in Honolulu under the glimpse of meeting Jack. This was not a spur of the moment confrontation, it was a planned encounter, designed to give the perpetrator access. Once they were alone, the situation quickly escalated. Accounts of investigations combined with later confessions revealed that Dana was confronted about their relationship. Arguments had turned violent. The method of attack was brutal. Jack Ireland, using a firearm, shot Dana multiple times. This wasn't a single accidental discharge, this was a targeted act designed to ensure the outcome was fatal. Evidence later indicated that Dana was aware and conscious during the initial stages of the attack, struggling against the assault before succumbing to her injuries. After the shooting, Dana's body was left in the remote area, hidden from immediate discovery. This decision to conceal the crime suggested the premeditation and a desire to evaluate accountability, reinforcing that this was not a crime of passion in the impulsive sense, but it was one of calculated violence. Law enforcement did not immediately know Dana was missing. Once friends and families reported her disappearance, authorities began piercing together her last known movements.
Also, piercing.
Piecing, sorry.
I forgot. But damn, she really just straight up like just disappeared without a trace, like for a bit after that.
Yeah. Basically, it was just like, oh, hold on, I'm gonna go meet my boyfriend real quick in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere. Okay, bye. Like,
I wonder where she's at.
I wonder where she went.
She shit, man.
I'm sorry. It's not funny at all.
It really
It's just
ain't.
can't really lighten the mood on true crime, but yeah.
Yeah.
Witness statements, vehicle records, and phone logs helped create a timeline that eventually pointed directly to Jack Ireland. From the start, investigators faced challenges. There was no direct witnesses to the shooting, and there was no immediate physical evidence tying Jack Ireland to the crime scene. But small details began to form a picture. Prosecutors noted that Dana's last interactions were with Jack, and his behaviors following her disappearance raised suspicion. Statements from friends and neighbors painted a consistent picture that there had been tension, threats, and indications of jealousy. Over time, forensic evidence was collected. Ballistics linked to the bullets to the firearm known to be in Jack Ireland's possession. Additional evidence, including fingerprints and traces at key locations, uh, corroborating the timeline of Dana's last known movements. Facing with mounting evidence, Jack Ireland was arrested and charged with the murder of Dana Ireland. His initial statements and attempts at explanation were scrutinized against the physical and testimonial evidence. As the investigation processed, the pattern of premeditation and personal motive became increasingly clear. Authorities were able to demonstrate that Dana had been lured and confronted intentionally. The attack was deliberate and non-accidental, and the evidence from multiple sources connected Jack Ireland directly to the scene and the weapon. Also, that post-crime behavior indicated awareness of guilt and attempts to avoid detection.
Sounds about right.
The combination of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the investigative reconstruction created a strong case for prosecution. The trial of Jack Ireland was closely followed in Hawaii. Prosecutors laid out the narrative meticulously, emphasizing premeditation, intent, and the personal nature of the crime. They showed how Dana's trust and relational dynamic had been exploited to fabricate the murder. Defense argues that the attempt to mitigate responsibility, portraying the act as a confrontation that escalated unexpectedly, but the evidence of planning and control undermined claims of accidental or impulsive action. The jury was presented with forensic findings, ballistic reports, and a reconstructed timeline of Dana's last hours. Each piece reinforced the prosecutor's case that it wasn't a random tragedy, and it was an outcome of deliberate actions by someone who had intimate knowledge of the victim. Ultimately, Jack Ireland was convicted of first-degree murder. The sentencing reflected the severity and premeditation nature of the crime. Excuse me. I meant to put premeditated, but I did type out premeditation nature.
Okay.
Oopsies. He received life imprisonment, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to harm others. For Dana Ireland's family and friends, the outcome brought a measure of justice, though it could never undo the loss. The case left an indelible mark on Honolulu and the University of Hawaii community, serving as a stark reminder that the personal relationships, jealousy, and control can escalate into fatal violence. Even in a known place for beauty and serenity, tragedy can strike when anyone's intentions turns lethal. The murder of Dana Ireland remains a sobering example of how personal conflicts, when combined with premeditation, can result in irreversible loss.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna guard it one more time before the last one. If you got it, you know to do. Cheers.
The next page, I'm gonna let you do this last by yourself. Because I must walk the dog. I must walk the skinwalker. She has been out in a long while.
Are you sure you just don't want to sit through the last one or what?
I'm sure. Why not? I was gonna listen back to it on the fucking channel.
Oh, you're just gonna listen back to it on YouTube?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want, it's up to you.
No, true. I am definitely after this I'm going to check out the dog.
So with this one, we're going to Idaho.
Oh, okay.
No, not Idaho, Idaho. You know what? Anyways,
No,
we're going. We're sorry. The Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell case.
Chad Daybell.
And if I'm pronouncing those wrong, I deeply apologize. Idaho is often associated with wide open spaces, rugged landscapes, and quiet communities. Also, potatoes. But between the mountains and the farmland, one of the most bizarre and tragic series of events in recent U.S. history unfolded. A story of a family, faith, and murder gripped the nation. At the center of this case were Lori Vallow and her husband Chad Daybell, and Lori's two children, Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow. The story spans multiple. The story actually spans multiple states, but the events that ultimately drew investigators' attention began in Idaho. So this one, I'm kind of cheating a little bit.
A little.
It initially started in Idaho.
Okay.
So I'm cheating a little bit with this one, but it started in 2019, actually. So this is actually really recent. This is like COVID, early COVID, or like right before COVID.
You're saying that like that wasn't 6, almost 7 years ago.
Well, it's still relatively recent.
Yeah, compared to us.
Like compared to other cases we do. Lori Vallow was a mother who had a complex and troubled history. By most accounts, she had been through multiple marriages and had experienced strained relationships with family members. She became involved with Chad Daybell, a self-published author of apocalyptic religious books, who had shared her belief in intimate end-of-world prophecies. Chad Daybell was charismatic but controversial. His writings and sermons emphasized the supernatural, preparing for an apocalypse, and the idea of spiritual survival. Those ideas, combined with his personal relationship with Lori, would later play a significant role in the tragedy that unfolded. The children, being Tylee, being 16, and JJ, 7, were caught between adults whose judgment had become increasingly erratic. Reports from neighbors and friends described Lori and Chad as obsessed with religious prophecy, sometimes speaking in cryptic terms about the end times and spiritual battles. Before the events in Idaho, both Lori and Chad had disturbing histories that investigators would later scrutinize. Lori had been involved in legal issues related to her children's custody, and Chad had experienced multiple personal losses and controversies, including deaths of previous spouses under suspicious circumstances.
I'm not gonna lie, I was just expecting to hear cult activity in general, but that works too.
Yeah, usually it would be like cult-like activity, but in this case, no, they were just extremely religious. But like, but like rapture, like end of day, like end of the world type religious. There's like different flavors of religion. I feel like
There, I can't say on YouTube right now.
well, I'm saying like there's a lot of different types of religion. Like you could say you're extremely religious, and you can mean that you just pray every night, which is
When
not
does religion start turning into a cult?
when you start harming yourself or others. I feel like then it starts becoming a cult, in my opinion. When you start harming yourself or others just to honor this like deity or being you're honoring.
That's a philosophical debate that could be had right now, but that's not the topic of discussion for right now. Anyway, back to the video.
Yeah, okay. We can't really get too much into that anyways. So in mid 2019, Lori had moved her family to Idaho. This relocation marked the beginning of a troubling sequence of disappearances and deaths. She and Chad began isolating themselves, cutting off contact with relatives, and embracing the increasingly extreme beliefs about death, the apocalypse, and their role in it. The tension built quietly at first, but it was quickly apparent to the family and the authorities that something was deeply wrong. Tylee and JJ were missing by September of 2019, and their absence prompted investigations that would uncover a series of shocking connections, lies, and ultimately murder.
Oh god.
So now it's getting to the point where, like, okay, they're doing some cult shit now. Now they're doing some cult shit.
Escalated very quickly.
Yeah. The timeline of these events in Idaho is complex, spanning multiple locations and months of investigation. But the core tragedy centers on the deaths of Tylee and JJ. Investigators later established that the children were killed intentionally, apologies, a fact obscured for months by deception and movements across states. The exact dates and methods remain partially speculative due to the initial concealment, but evidence indicates that both Lori and Chad were complicit in planning and executing the deaths. In the case of J.J. Vallow, Lori had acquaintances that the boy was staying with family members. Wait, what? In the case of JJ, hold on. In the case of JJ Vallow, Lori told acquaintances that the boy was staying with family members.
There you go.
Yet he was in reality living under her control and ultimately murdered. Tylee Ryan similarly was removed from public life with false explanations given to friends and authorities. Chad Daybell, for his part, actively participated in manipulating the narrative. Evidence and court testimony suggests that he reinforced Lori's beliefs and actions, partially surrounding the idea of cleansing the family for spiritual purposes. The accumulation of these actions occurred at the Daybell's property in Idaho. While investigators could not reconstruct every detail, the forensic evidence and confessions that followed confirmed that the children were dead, and that Lori and Chad had intentionally concealed the attempt to manipulate the investigation and avoid detection. The deaths were not impulsive. They were the result of calculated decisions based on a shared delusion of religious prophecy and apocalyptic thinking. That combination of ideology and the personal control created an environment which murder became, in their minds, justified.
Some fucking hell.
I mean, okay. Gonna like little side note real quick. Breaking the fourth wall real quick. I don't know if this counts. I do actually know someone that is religious in that way. That's like at the end is near, kind of like believes in the rapture and believes it's going to happen soon, and will give all their stuff away, like that type of person.
How'd that rapture a couple months ago go for him?
I'm gonna let that slide only because you know who I'm talking about, and the person is like not talking on a religious scale. Like him, just overall is not that great of a person. But honestly, like if he was a normal, like a regular, like a normal human being, and not a jerk, honestly, I wouldn't have anything too wrong with that mindset. Like it's kind of understandable why people would think that way. In some cases, I only say that because like someone can easily look at history and look at like the science of like, oh, an extinction happened this time with the dinosaurs. It's going to happen with us because we're not making the gods happy or something. I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like that is a mindset some people have, and I mean it's kind of understandable in some cases if you are that religious.
Yeah, whatever works in some cases. Though it's really fun.
Yeah, it's like whatever floats your boat, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone else, you're good. Like, Once law enforcement became aware that Haley and JJ were missing, the investigation quickly broadened.
Broadened.
Broadened. Yeah,
Broadened.
because I typed broadened instead of just broadened. I don't know why I did that. Yeah, I type too quickly sometimes. Once law enforcement became aware that Tylee and JJ were missing, the investigation quickly broadened. Authorities discovered that the children had not been enrolled in school for months and had not been seen publicly despite claims by Lori and Chad that they were safe elsewhere. Investigators began tracing movements across multiple states. Digital evidence, including email, phone records, and social media posts, painted a picture of deception, concealment, and preparation. Physical evidence at properties connected to Chad and Lori also supported suspicions of foul play. Authorities discovered that multiple deaths surrounding Chad's previous marriages were suspiciously timed, adding a historical context to the case and suggested a pattern of manipulative and lethal behavior. By mid 2020, the net tightened. Lori Vallow was arrested in Hawaii, attempting to flee, and Chad Daybell was detained in Idaho. Investigators also uncovered evidence related to the deaths of both Tylee and JJ, which confirmed that the children had been intentionally killed and buried on the Daybell property. Key evidence included forensic recovery of the children's remains from the Daybell property, digital and financial evidence showing coordinated attempts to mislead authorities, testimony from acquaintances and family members regarding the ideological influence.
English is hard. English goes.
Ideological. There you go.
Yeah.
Influence and statements about preparing the family spiritually, and historical context suggesting premeditation based on previous suspicious deaths. The evidence painted a picture of two adults who were deeply entwined, not only romantically, but in a shared worldview that justified extreme violence in their minds. The trial of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were complex, emotionally charged, and closely followed nationwide. Prosecutors presented the detailed case, emphasizing premeditation, manipulation, deliberate concealment of the children's deaths. The narration focused on the planning and execution of the children's murders, the use of religious and apocalyptic beliefs to manipulate to manipulate perception and justify violence, and the concealment of evidence and movement across multiple states, and also including the historical context of previous suspicious deaths connected to only Chad Daybell, not Lori. Defense strategies attempted to challenge motive, intent, and the role of mental health, but the combination of forensic evidence, confessions, and witness testimony made a compelling case for prosecution. Ultimately, the court proceedings resulted in convictions. Lori Vallow was convicted of multiple counts related to the murders of Tylee and JJ, and Chad Daybell faced charges for his participation in the crimes. The sentences reflected the gravity, premeditation, and emotional weight of the case. The aftermath of the case left deep scars. Families, communities, and the public grappled with how ideology, obsession, and relation control could culminate in such horrific acts. Idaho, a state known for its peaceful landscape, beautiful backdrops, for one of the most unusual and chilling cases in the 21st century. The Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell case serves as a reminder that even in quiet, seemingly ordinary settings, extreme belief systems and personal manipulation can lead to unimaginable tragedy. It wasn't random, it wasn't impulsive, and it was a deliberate and deeply personal. So now 4 cases, 4 horrifying stories, 4 communities forever scarred. From the sun-soaked streets of Florida, where the Deltona Massacre shattered a neighborhood.
Inside a house.
Well, the streets of Florida, quote unquote.
Okay.
That's it's figure of speech.
Yeah.
From the sun-soaked streets of Florida, where the Deltona murders shattered the neighborhood's sense of safety, to Georgia, where the heartbreaking death of 10-year-old Emma Moss exposed to darkness that could hide even behind closed doors. The terror doesn't stop there, because across the Pacific, in Hawaii, the shocking murder of Dana Ireland reminded us that even paradise can hide unimaginable horror. And finally, Idaho, in the chilling saga of Lori Vallow and the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell case revealed how manipulation, obsession, and betrayal can destroy entire families.
And how religion's a hell of a drug and good.
The victims in each story, the children, the families, the innocents that were that were caught in crossfire, deserve to be remembered. Their lives were stolen, but their stories remain. As we close tonight's journey, remember that terror doesn't only exist in movies and legends. It can happen in any town, behind any front door, or in the person you think that you know. Thank you for joining us on United States of Terror. Stay aware, stay cautious, and never forget that the darkness sometimes lurks in plain sight.
Eating.
Indeed. Bye.